And good afternoon. It's the 22nd of October, 2020, and this is our 25th episode, our silver episode, if you will, of Thursday with Charlie. I'm looking forward to being with you, and I never thought it would go this long, but it has, and I'm still enjoying it, and I hope you're still enjoying it as well. We're going to keep it going. The Mass attendance, you may have noticed that this past weekend was really good. People are coming. We're keeping the reservation system in place, so please call on Thursday or Friday between 9 and 3 and make a reservation for whatever Mass you'd like to attend. But because of the increased capacity, if you forget to make the reservation, please feel free to come. We should be able, with no problems, just take your name and phone number at the door and get you in. There is one special thing coming up this weekend at the 8 a.m. Mass on Sunday, this weekend, Sunday, October the 25th. We're going to celebrate First Holy Communion for 9 of our young people. That should have been done back in May, and we didn't do it because of the COVID virus, because of all the restrictions in place. So we're going to be doing it this Sunday, but that's going to mean there'll be a rush of people for the 8 a.m. Mass because the 9 students have their parents and they have some relatives who are in the area or friends who are going to be coming. So I'm going to ask if you at all possibly can go to a different Mass than the 8 a.m. Mass on this Sunday only. It would be a help to keep our numbers within line. But otherwise, if you can't, you're certainly welcome to come to the 8 o'clock Mass. We will fit in. We're going to separate people as best we can, and we're going to celebrate First Communion beautifully, even though it is several months late. We congratulate these 9 young people, and we look forward to many more in the years to come. I decided this week I wanted to talk a little bit about something called liturgical seasons and liturgical colors. Sometimes we get questions on them. I didn't have any particular questions about it, but I just thought it would be an interesting topic to mention. The Church basically celebrates 6 liturgical seasons, 6 seasons of worship in the course of the year. And we don't begin our church year on January 1st like the civil year begins. We begin our church year on the first Sunday of Advent, which is usually in December, or sometimes it's even the last Sunday in November that it would be. Those 4 weeks of Advent are a period of preparation for the great feast of Christmas. And the Advent season extends over 4 Sundays. Sometimes there isn't a full week after the 4th Sunday. In fact, sometimes Christmas even occurs the day or two after the 4th Sunday of Advent. But that period of preparation for Christmas, we read a lot from the prophet Isaiah. We get ready for the coming of the Messiah, is the celebration of Advent, and that's our first season of the church year. It gets us ready particularly for Christmas, and it begins usually in December, sometimes rarely the last Sunday. The first Sunday of Advent is the last Sunday of within the month of November. And Christmas has its own season. In fact, for the Feast of Christmas, December 25th, it has what's called an octave, 8 days of special celebration, but then it extends as a season all the way into January to the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord. So it goes beyond the civil New Year, it goes beyond Epiphany, the celebration of the coming of the wise men, and it ends with the baptism of the Lord, and that is called the Christmas season. Lent is the next big season that we would come to. Lent begins on Ash Wednesday, and it extends 40 days as our preparation for Easter. Lent is considered a penitential season, but in addition to a period of penance getting ready, it's also a period of preparation in the sense that in the early church, this was the time when new converts prepared to come into the church. So it was a preparation for baptism and being admitted to the whole faith. Following Lent, we have the last 3 days, which are called the Sacred Triduum, the sacred 3-day period. That would be Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday. Some people say, well, they're just a part of Lent. They are, but they're a special part of Lent. They're days when we recall things like the Last Supper, the crucifixion, the whole carrying of the cross, the passion of the Christ, and the time in the tomb we mark on Holy Saturday. Next season is Easter, beginning on Easter Sunday and extending for 50 days, 50 days until after the Feast of Pentecost. And we celebrate within Easter the rising of the Lord, but also we celebrate Divine Mercy Sunday on the Sunday after Easter. We celebrate the Feast of the Ascension of the Lord 40 days after Easter, and then on the 50th day after Easter, we celebrate Pentecost, the coming of the Holy Spirit. And the last season actually has two parts, and that's ordinary time. Ordinary time are the Sundays that occur between the end of the Christmas season and the beginning of Lent. And then the second part of it begins after Pentecost until the first Sunday of Advent. Those two seasons are called ordinary time. They just go on through major readings of the gospel. We tend to read from one particular gospel every year in a cycle of 3 years, and then we use the gospel of John mainly on special feasts within that year. Liturgical colors, most people are familiar with the colors that we wear, and there's a reason why that we would put on a particular color on a particular Sunday or a particular feast day. And the primary colors that we use are green, which is the color of ordinary time. Most of the year, most weekdays of the year, most Sundays of the year, we're wearing green vestments. It's the color of hope. It's the color of growth. It's the color of new life and beauty. And generally, it's a very hopeful color. Red is a very bright color. Red is worn on feasts of the martyrs, people who have given their life for the faith. It's on the feast of the evangelists, those who have written the Gospels, or the apostles. And it's on the feast of Pentecost. We celebrate the coming of the Holy Spirit. We also wear red on Good Friday to mark the Passion of the Lord. White is the really big celebratory color, and what most people are not aware of is white can be substituted with silver or gold. That's why you sometimes have very ornate silver or gold vestments in place of just plain white. And that's worn on Christmas, on feasts of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's worn on Easter. It's worn on very major feasts that do not involve martyrdom or particular aspects like apostles or the Holy Spirit. Purple is the color of Advent and Lent, sometimes called violet. It's worn during the 4 weeks of Advent, getting ready for the Feast of Christmas, and it's worn during the 40 days of Lent, getting ready for the great Feast of Easter. There are some other colors that have a little bit of connection with us. One is the color rose, or pink, as I like to call it. Rose is the color that kind of breaks up the purple. And during both seasons, the season of Advent and the season of Lent, purple is worn on one of the Sundays towards the middle or the end of the season. So during Advent, we would wear purple on the third Sunday of Advent, called Gaudete Sunday. Rejoice, we're almost at Christmas. And it's also worn on the fourth Sunday of Lent, Laetare Sunday, getting ready for the great Feast of Easter, again, rejoicing. And a very much unused color is black. Black was worn much in the Church before the Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council, for funerals. It is an option that still remains and can be worn for funerals. It can also be worn for All Souls Day. It is not as frequently worn these days, but it still does remain as one of the liturgical colors. And some people question, well, what about blue? I've seen blue vestments, and blue is a beautiful color, but it's not used in the Catholic Church as one of the colors for the vestments. It is used in the Anglican Church and its American branch, the Episcopalian Church, when they're wearing vestments. Blue is considered one of their colors. I brought over two samples, one in black vestments. This is a stole in black. It's very beautiful. It's a damask pattern, and again, worn on All Souls Day. It used to be worn for every funeral. Now it's worn rarely for funerals. And this would be a stole that could substitute for white. It's actually got a lot of gold trim on it and gold braid on it, kind of decorative for those particular occasions. There's some beautiful styles, investments, and colors. We have a nice sampling here at the parish, and I intend to wear the same vestments over and over because I like a particular style or I like a particular color. If you ever notice, as you will this Sunday, the green I wear, we have a couple of sets of green, but the green I wear is the really bright green, that kind of an emerald green. So I tend to wear that one more frequently than the others. We received several, 6 to be exact, really cool questions this week that I'd like to take some time with because I think they're worthwhile. Whoever is asking the questions, I think there's always several people beyond the person who asks the question who actually have the same question and would be delighted to get an answer. The first one concerns Mary. Is there a reason why we don't refer to Mary generally as Saint Mary, although we do say Saint Joseph, the foster father of Jesus, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, but we refer to Mary more as Blessed Mary, or the Blessed Virgin Mary? Is there a difference in the title? And there actually isn't. It's more custom than anything else. The idea of Mary being a saint is certainly true. Some of you may remember a very famous movie with Bing Crosby back in the 1940s, The Bells of St. Mary's. There are thousands of churches in the United States named St. Mary, and those churches are named after the Blessed Virgin Mary. And so she is honored as Saint Mary. But more commonly in the liturgy, we refer to her as the Blessed Virgin or the Blessed Virgin Mary. St. Joseph, by the way, did not have a place in the Eucharistic prayer until very recently. It was Pope Francis who introduced the name of Joseph into our Eucharistic prayer so that at every Mass, Joseph is remembered. Certainly, if you had to have a hierarchy of saints, Mary is considered higher than all the saints. She's the queen of the saints, we even refer to her as, but she is one of the saints as well. The second question, why are priests called Father when rather clearly in the Gospel Jesus says, call no one on earth your Father? Well, actually, that's an interesting thing. We believe, first of all, that when Jesus was speaking, he was not speaking absolutely, otherwise it would be against the rules of the church to call our own natural human father. And Jesus did not intend that. He was arguing with the Pharisees and arguing with the scribes about the idea of places of honor and positions of honor. We're not supposed to be considered better, higher, and take those things to heart. But the idea of calling a priest father was not common in the early church. Priest was referred to as an elder, and the term most generally used was the presbyters of the church, those who were elders who were guiding the community. Eventually, the bishop came to be called Father, so you would have the bishop known as Father, but the priests still known as elders or presbyters. Later on, as monastic communities of monks developed, they would call one another brother, but they would call the chief one in the monastery Father. He became Father Abbot. Gradually, it came down that priests got referred to as father, and it was not until the 19th century, the late 1800s, that Cardinal Manning over in England decreed that priests should be addressed as father in the English-speaking world. And that's when it really began. So that calling a priest father is actually only about 150, 200 years old. Of course, there are some variations on that. Some people, when they're talking to the priest, refer to him as padre, and that's kind of a friendly term. It's almost like daddy. It sounds a lot more friendly, so I never object to padre. And of course, in the military, my 29 years in the military, all of those who represented God were referred to as chaplain. So whether you were Catholic or Jewish or Protestant of any sort, you were referred to as chaplain, and that's always an acceptable title. I do have one funny story from my own past. I had a parishioner years ago who was talking to me, and in the midst of the conversation, she slipped and she said something to me referring to me as Charlie. And then she froze, and she actually put her hands over her mouth, and she was there, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I called you Charlie." I said, "My mother has called me Charlie for my whole life. There's nothing wrong with it." And she never quite eased up on that. It still bothered her that she had done it. But I have noticed that in recent years, sometimes when you'll be talking with people, and it tends to be people of a certain age, not the very young, but people around my own age rather, they'll be speaking to me, and they'll fall into the habit of just saying Charlie. And after they get into it, they kind of relax, and it makes them feel, this is nice. We're kind of with one another. We're kind of just talking as equals. And I certainly don't mind it. So please, the title Father is what is proper, but I don't mind Charlie. It's my given name. My parents used it for decades and decades with me. I love Padre. That always sounds so friendly and colloquial. And if you say chaplain, that reminds me of very happy military days over the years. The third question is, do you think we will go back to exchanging the sign of peace, receiving the precious blood from the chalice, receiving communion on our tongue? Even one person said, do you think we'll ever go back to having donuts after the 8 o'clock Mass on Sunday morning? I think some of the things we will go back to, but I think it's going to take a while. I think probably in the near future, we will go back to being able to exchange the sign of peace. We might do it verbally at first, and in fact, in some parts of our country, it was always done verbally, never physically by extending your hands or hugging or anything like that. But I think we will get to the point in a few months where we'd be able to once again extend our hands to one another at the sign of peace. And if you feel comfortable doing that, when we get back to it, that will be fine. But there will always be people who would rather not touch. They would rather just bow or acknowledge the other person with peace. I think it'll be a long time before we go back to receiving the precious blood from the chalice. The idea of contamination, of receiving people's lips touching the same chalice, I think is going to linger for a while. And for the first 1,500 years, easily, maybe longer, in the church, we didn't receive from the chalice. That's actually probably a little bit more than 1,500, probably closer to 1,900 years, that we didn't receive regularly from the chalice. And so I think that will come back perhaps, but maybe not really soon. That may be a while until they can solve the idea of people with receiving, picking up, drinking from the same cup. I know other people have suggested, well, why don't you get little cups and give them to everybody? Because the whole idea of the symbolism is the one bread, the one body, the one cup of Christ's blood. And so even the idea of having 2 or 3 chalices was fought against for a lot of time by the church, that if it's going to be from the chalice, it should be from the one chalice. So I don't think we would ever go to little cups for everybody. And the problem would be, we believe that Jesus remains wherever his body or blood remain, so that the idea of washing those cups preserving them, protecting them when they're all over the church would be almost an insurmountable obstacle. I think that we will get back eventually to communion on the tongue for those people who prefer it. Right now, it's the fear that you would touch, and you might touch up that person's tongue with your fingers, and you might pick up some form of germ or the virus that you would spread. I think once that fear has lessened, I think the people who prefer to receive communion on the tongue, I think that will come back perhaps more quickly than anything else. And the idea of donuts after the 8 a.m. Mass, I think once we get our new building, or the Garces Center, up and operative, I think we're going to be having not only donuts, but we'll probably do other things after the Masses here at church. It'd be so easy to set up in advance and be ready for them. Question number 4. Did Jesus have a favorite disciple? That's interesting. If you read the Gospels and you go over them, Jesus did a lot of things with the 12, but he also did several things only with Peter, James, and John. For instance, when he went up the mountain, Mount Tabor, for the Transfiguration, he took Peter, James, and John with him. And then also, as we get to the Last Supper, we find that John is referred to as the beloved disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. And so I think it'd be fair to say that, according to the Gospels, John stood out as the one that was the favorite of Jesus. That doesn't mean that he didn't love the other disciples. It just means that I think as a human being, which Jesus really was, in addition to being really God, he could have someone with whom he felt more comfortable with. But I think you can take it, while John might have been the absolute favorite, Peter and James were also favorites. And then you have interesting stories with other disciples where Jesus spent time with them as he worked a miracle, as he did a particular teaching with them, that they show up in the gospel, and you wonder, oh my gosh, that might be a favorite in a way too. I just saw a glimpse of a new movie about the life of Jesus, and one of the scenes portrayed was the calling of Matthew. And in the movie, the way it's portrayed, I don't know when this is coming out, but when it's portrayed, Jesus goes over to Matthew, who in the movie is depicted as a very young person, perhaps a late teenager, and he says, "Come and follow me." And it looks so friendly and so inviting that it's very easy to watch that and understand why Matthew would have left his customs post and gone after and followed Jesus. So I think Jesus did, we'll put John as the absolute favorite because he is called the beloved, but certainly Jesus had special relationships with other of the apostles and disciples as well. And I think we can't discount the fact that people like Martha and Mary, who show up in the gospel stories, it says Jesus enjoyed going to their home and spending time with them and with Lazarus, their brother. And so Jesus had friends outside of the circle of the apostles themselves. Our 5th question is about Pontius Pilate. People have sometimes thought of him as a bad guy, but was he really that bad? And I think history, if you read the history of the time, Pontius Pilate ended up as the procurator, the Roman liaison, the Roman leader in a little outpost of Palestine. It was probably not what Pilate wanted to do with his life. Certainly, if you were going to be a Roman procurator, you wanted to be in one of the major provinces. You wanted to be in one of the big cities. And here he was, a Roman functionary who finds himself at the edge of the Roman Empire in Palestine among a conquered people who were constantly rising up. I don't think Pilate was viewed very highly by Rome as being, wow, this is a really smart, good guy. Let's put him near the central office. It was kind of, let's put him out here in the outposts. But I think in the gospel stories, when we read the Passion accounts, Pilate comes across as somewhat of a good guy. He's someone who wants to help Jesus if he can, and he can't understand why Jesus was brought to him. And when he brings Jesus before him, he can't understand why Jesus won't speak with him, won't beg for his life from him, won't do something that will give Pilate an in to try to do something. And Jesus speaks about truth, and Pilate questions, well, what is truth? What does that matter? And don't you understand, he says to Jesus, that I have power over your life? And Jesus responds, if it weren't from God, you would have no power. Jesus remains so calm in those interchanges. I think if we were to judge Pilate accurately, Pilate, I think, really wanted to save Jesus, really wanted to help him, but just couldn't figure out how to keep his job, keep his position and reputation, and still save Jesus. And there's that famous scene in the Gospels where Pilate orders water to be brought to him, and he washes his hands in the water, symbolically saying to the Jews, you take him, do what you want with him. My hands are clean of this. I won't have part in the death of this just man. So I think Pilate really is better than maybe earlier history has judged him to be. And the sixth question was a question about my Mass. Does Father Charlie have different Mass with things like peeps on them, or bacon on them, or owls on them, or things like that, even fruitcake on them? Well, actually, I have several Mass with owls on it. I don't have any with fruitcake, and I don't have any with peeps as yet, but I do have a couple that have. This has a bacon pattern on it that people have given me. I have some with a magic pattern on it that people have given me. I have some religious ones, which are beautifully designed. And on this one I've been wearing this week, it says, bless you. I can wear it over my mouth, and I don't even have to speak. It's as if I can give you a blessing that way. And I have some very colorful ones that people have given me, and several others that people have made, and I really enjoy getting them. I think that the Mass are not going to be around too much longer, but as long as they are, we're going to have fun, and we'll make them a part of our life, as part of our lifestyle, and have a little fun doing it. I just want to repeat one quick quote. In Sunday's sermon, I mentioned a friend of mine, Darren, who had said and texted to me, actually, something very wise. And I want to repeat it because it's worth remembering. Darren has had a car accident this year. He lost his job at Universal Studios. He ended up catching the COVID virus. And still he comes back with, live your life. Fear is what can take you down a really dark path. Put down your fear, pick up your faith, and get ready for the new normal. A lot of wisdom in those words. Now it's time for our weekly visit from Pascal over here. He comes down with a message. And as it turns out, his message has two of the famous sayings of Pontius Pilate. Quid Est Veritas, what is truth? And Quod Scripsi, Scripsi, what I have written, I have written. Pilate is meeting with Jesus, asks Jesus, when Jesus speaks of being the truth that comes from God, Pilate says, what is truth? And I think that's a question that all of us can ponder. What is truth? What is absolute truth? Why does truth exist? And it doesn't depend on me. Truth is there whether I believe it or know it, actually. And I think that concept of absolute truth is so very important. There are things that are absolutely true, and they're not just subject to feelings or whims or the times of the year or the generations of the people. I think Pilate was on to something, questioning what is truth. Quid Est Veritas. And then the other saying, Quod Scripsi, Scripsi, is one of my favorite sayings of Pontius Pilate, that when Jesus was nailed to the cross, Pilate had a sign put above his head which said in Latin, Hebrew, and Greek, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And the Pharisees came to him and said, why did you write King of the Jews? You should have written, Jesus said, I am King of the Jews. And Pilate responded to them with that beautiful phrase in Latin, Quod Scripsi, Scripsi. What I have written, I have written. I'm not going to change it. Have a really good week. We thank you for joining us for 25 shows now. God love you and God bless you.